Why am I recording like this? I don't know, but thanks so much for clicking the video. I just wanted to say that I originally had this video way more edited and way more well produced, but then my file got corrupted and there was nothing I could really do except start over. And then at that point, it's just like I've already waited for so long for this video to come out. I've taken way too long, so I just wanted to get it out. I have a bad problem. There's so many videos I have where they're on my hard drive and I just didn't think anybody would like them. But the way I'm going to grow is by putting these videos out. So I was going to can it, but I promised it. And then, like I said, I just want to make sure I put these videos out so that I can get the feedback I need to, in order to get better. So thank you so much for watching. If you do like the video, leave a like. And if you're interested in more content like that, subscribe. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Manga Madhouse. My name is Darian. On this channel, we talk everything manga related. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. And what we're doing in this video is we're talking about Homunculus, a manga by Hideo Yamamoto. This is a 10-volume manga series. At least I think the American volumes. I want to say the Japanese volumes are maybe more, but I don't know. But they're all collected in these 5 omnibus physical volumes. And what I'm going to be doing, if you cannot tell kind of about how this video is set up, I'm going to be reviewing each volume, each book, as I'm reading it. So I'm not going to read the whole thing and then we're going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it as I'm reading it because I think it'll be cool to like look back and be, oh, I said this about this part. I was completely wrong about that. Going, as I continue to read. So I think that'll just be really fun. And I'm reading this for my spooky reads, but I really wouldn't call it spooky. It's not even scary. Is it even really a thriller? I wouldn't even call it psychological. I don't know what I would call this. It does build suspense, and I think a lot of that has to do with Yamamoto's work, his artwork, and like we can really go ahead and get into it. And this is just me rambling. I don't really have. I have like points just to make sure I'm not like saying something that doesn't belong or whatever the case may be. What Yamamoto is able to do in here, I really like because, as I said, this feels like a suspense. I really wouldn't call it a horror. I really wouldn't even as of right now, call it a thriller. But a lot of suspense is built through these conversations between Ito and Nakoshi. Nakoshi is our main character. Is it Nakoshi? Yeah, Nakoshi is our main character. And to start off with Nakoshi, he's a 34-year-old man. We don't really know what happened in his past life, but we know he was some type of engineer or something. And then for the last couple of weeks, he'd been living in his car. And then he ended up losing his car. Now, you can tell very early on that he loves his car. And while he's out there sleeping in his car with the homeless people, there's an obvious disconnect between him and the homeless people. It feels as though the homeless people, they have a reason of being there. Nakoshi just does not feel the same. Now, of course, part of that is he's sleeping in his car, but it just doesn't feel like he's like the rest. Now, it could just be he's the main character, so of course he's not like the rest. But just off rip, you can already tell that he's just not quite in the same situation as those guys. It's almost like he's choosing to be homeless. And there's some things that kind of allude to that. There's little flashbacks about him thinking about his job. He's like, I can't go back to that. But we don't actually know what happens. But what we do know what happens is he's approached about having his surgery by a medical student named Ito Manabu, I believe, and he's like, no. Yeah, well, I wouldn't say he's like, no, but he really's not having it. Nakoshi is just not really interested, but once money is offered, that everything changes, especially when now his car has been towed. Now, did Ito have to play a part in that? Yes, and one thing I'll say is you can tell really early on how manipulative Ito can be. And part of that is, as you see, he got Nakoshi's car towed, and he knew how much Nakoshi cared about that car. So he was able to get it towed. He was able to get it back as well. But still, the fact that he was able to get it towed to get what he wants, which is to in turn have this surgery. Now, we know Nakoshi doesn't have a job, so while him missing his car was incentive for him to go ahead and get the procedure done, where they drill a hole. It's called terrapanning or terrapanning. I never looked up the official pronunciation of it, but I've heard about it before, where you drill a hole in someone's head, and then that's really what they used to do to cure mental illness a long time ago, and I hope that is not happening within the last 200 years, but I know a long time ago it was happening. I say 200 years, maybe 100 years. That would be more accurate, right? No, I could 200 years. 200 years is safe to say that I hope that hasn't happened. Either way, the point is that it was occurring, and yeah. So what was different here, and I said this when I was thinking about, as I was like halfway through, and I made a video talking about how I'm going to be doing this read for October, is that terror painting is to release the mental illness from your body, as opposed to this time it's the same procedure, but it's bringing it in. And as we continue, we see that, and we'll talk about Ito being manipulative more in a second here, but we see that Nakoshi is starting to see other, like I said I said traumas in one video, but it's not always a trauma. It's just experiences. Now most of them are negative, but he's able to see their experiences and take them on, as far as just they creep him out. And in a way, at times he's like, am I nuts? Am I crazy? And that's, once again, that's kind of what it was thought of people who did terror painting, was to release that, so to bring that in. Now we don't know what he was doing in his past life. We don't know what that was like, but to bring that in, I think that's just an interesting way to kind of look at it. But as we continue, he's seeing these people and they're homunculi. Now he doesn't know at this point what they are, but they seem as though they're monsters or distorted or something's wrong with them. But in reality, as Ito explains to him, is that it's just you're able to see kind of like a reflection of them. First person that we really dissect in this manga is the mob boss, and I forgot his name, but it's the Yakuza boss. And essentially, he was almost like a robot, and this robot kept slicing his pinky, but we didn't know why. And for some reason, Nakoshi was seeing this robot, or this Yakuza boss, as this robot trying to slice off his pinky, but it was like a kid inside. And come to find out, the Yakuza guy he was cutting like crops with his friend and accidentally cut off the pinky of his best friend and then ran off. And then he went on to cut pinkies forever, because I guess that just made sense. That part, like that little part, didn't make sense, but the whole like Nakoshi seeing it, that definitely made sense, because now you understand that Yakuza guy was carrying around that weight of guilt on him. And what's interesting about that is Ito mentioned that you're with this surgery, you're able to, you don't have necessarily a sixth sense, but all your other senses are heightened. And at one point, Nakoshi was able to say, hey, I smell guilt on you. What is it? And then that's when the mob boss eventually broke down and explained what happened. And the way to help this mob boss explain that was Nakoshi saying, hey, when I pushed my friend out in front of a car as a joke, and then his leg got ran over. Not the same, because the way it's portrayed in the manga, the mob boss it was a complete accident. There was no like, I'm trying to pull a prank on you or anything. It was just complete accident that he cut off his friend's pinky. Nakoshi, that's not quite the same. Which leads up to Ito telling Nakoshi that, yes, you are seeing all these homunculi, you are seeing all these people, and kind of like the way, or you're trying to see things they're trying to hide, or a different side of them, let's say. But let's not forget that these are projected onto them from you. So inside of everybody you see, there's a little bit of you, which I think that relates perfectly to what we were just talking about with the Yakuza mob boss, because Nakoshi said he himself had an incident where he hurt a friend. And during these conversations, I think that while nothing, like, because even the part with the Yakuza boss, that wasn't too suspenseful, in my opinion. Not really. But what made it suspenseful is just the dialogue, and then just kind of the framing of faces. Like I think Hideo Yamamoto does a really good job of just framing a facial expression to where you really feel what's on the page. And I'm not really feeling it from the dialogue. I'm thinking back, and like, it's not that the dialogue's poor or anything like that, and I think we really haven't had enough from the characters. Their face really gives it all. Like the pure shock that Nakoshi feels or senses or goes through, I guess, the pure shock on his face, it tells you everything you need to know about the scene. When he sees a homunculi, a monster is often how he describes them, and because they're all types of distorted, and it as of right now, it never goes away. He's just as shocked this time as he was the first time, because you never expect what this person has done or is doing or about to do. But once again, that goes to show you never know anybody. Like, you think you know someone, but you never know anybody. You never know what anybody is going through. But I really like just how Yamamoto is able to capture these facial expressions, because like I said, they really, really tell it all. And as we talk about the shock, the scared from Nakoshi, we also get the I would want to say we also get the how Ito is manipulative. Like, there's things that his face, like there's certain panels where he's licking his lips, or how he's looking at someone, or just how it's shaded, and how his face is like it's covered in half of it's covered in a shadow. There's just the way his face is framed in these panels that really shows you kind of like the manipulative nature of him. And one thing I will say that's missing from this first volume is that we don't really know. All of this is assumption. I can, based on what I've read so far, you can pretty, like, he's manipulated Ito. He's about to manipulate this girl they call 1775, which we'll get into that in a second. And that's just what he does. And it's not, it's not really far off, because him being I wouldn't say him being a doctor is what causes him to be manipulative, but there's all the time you see in fiction, really, and it's not to say it doesn't happen in real life, but you see it a lot in fiction, is that serial killers or people with like real issues, they're really smart, and they know how to talk around people or above people in a way where they're saying all these big words. They're saying a lot of things that's coincidental, or there might be a different scientific reason to prove it, but they're saying it one way so that you'll be like, oh, I believe this person. Now I'm either scared of them, I got to listen to them, or, they kind of got me. Like, I have to fall by their rules, or whatever the case may be. And that's, I feel like, what's happened with Nakoshi outside of the money. I think he kind of convinced Nakoshi a little bit, just off conversation, but a lot of it, of course, had to do with money. But then towards the end of this first volume right here, he's talking to 1775, this teenage girl, and he's picking up on all these coincidences, and then she's kind of feeling lost, scared. I don't know, but it's just something about he is already commanding the situation just by how he's able to pick up on these small things that your normal person wouldn't pick up on. So I think while he's a mystery, you're still being, without them actually being a flashback of some kind or anything being truly explained, just the way that the art is in this manga, and just by the way some of the dialogue that you get from Ito, and how he talks to really just anybody, but mainly it's been Nakoshi, it shows you all you need to know about the guy. And then also towards the end of this first volume, you're seeing that when Nakoshi looks at Ito, he sees like almost like a water figure, and when Nakoshi looks at Ito, he almost sees like this water figure, and I'm trying to figure out, does that mean he's transparent? Because Ito went in this whole thing about how the girl of sand is able to kind of adapt to certain situations, because 1775 is a teenage girl, and they found her at, like, I wouldn't say a brothel, but we'll just say a brothel for lack of a better word, but they go there to buy people go there to buy the clothes off schoolgirls or whatever, but there's no sexual acts whatsoever. It's just, that's kind of what they do. But out of the lineup of girls, which Ito thought would be a good idea to go to a place like that, which I feel like is another manipulative thing, because while those girls are giving up, I guess you could say, their body or their clothes, they're not really going there to be like psychoanalyzed. except that's what's happening here, and then you can kind of make it a a discussion on whether that matters or not. But either way, you get the point. So she's the one homunculi in the group of girls in that moment, and when they go into this private room, so Nakoshi could get a better look at her as far as just the homunculi, because she's like a sand monster. That is when it's weird, because like she turns into sand. And the art here is fantastic, but she is this sand monster. She like bursts herself. It's weird. But when Nakoshi goes back and tells Ito that, that's when he tells him that, like, sand is like sugar. It can take the shape of whatever container it's in. This girl, she kind of doesn't have a true identity, but she takes the shape of whatever situation she needs to be in order to thrive in that situation, I guess. And if you're looking at Ito and he's kind of in this same predicament, that's what it looks like, except it's just water. So that to me that means he's a little more dense. Maybe you can see right through him. I don't know. Like, you can look at the sand and say, okay, yes, I'm psychoanalyzing this girl, but I really don't know for sure, because sand you obviously can't see through. It's a solid, but water is water. He's able to see through him, and then sometimes when he talks, I think that's another point, is that every time he looks at Ito, which Ito doesn't know, it's always subtle when Nakoshi's looking at him, but Ito is talking and it's like the blub, 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 like a bubble, and I feel as though I really can't pick on what that is, but it does feel like I said, that Ito maybe just be no different, except you can just look at him and tell kind of who he is. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at right now. But so far, the story is very good. It's not what I expected, because we're still really early. But I've just heard like, oh, it's, you got to watch out. This is pretty grotesque. Oh, there's some strange things in there, like the whole sand monster vagina thing. That's pretty creepy. It wasn't anything scary, but like I said, artwork's fantastic. I think the pacing of the story, once it really got picked up, it really kind of went. And it's not even like there's that much going on, but I feel like you're learning a lot about what you're learning alongside Nakoshi, and I feel like that's good pacing, because while we're not speeding up, it doesn't feel like an info dump. We're just learning as it goes, and I think we're picking up every page like, oh my god, I didn't realize that. Neither did Nakoshi. Like, the realization is just happening at the same time, and I feel like it's at a steady pace, and I'm enjoying it so far. So that's kind of it for volume 1. Like I said, this video, I'm not going to have many cuts. I'm not going to have many edits. I'm just going to talk about each volume, and this video just may be an hour. If it's an hour, it's an hour. But overall, like I said, for volume 1 right now, I would say I thoroughly enjoyed it. There are no chapters, so I can't really tell you what chapter I'm on. But like I said, I finished the first 2 volumes. There's 2 volumes in each book, but I finished the first book. So now I'm about to start the second book right now, because I just finished the first book maybe an hour ago. But that's just kind of where I'm at. There's themes about infancy in here, because they're talking about how one, you can see how Nakoshi kind of lays down. I just do want to mention this because I do feel like it's important. Where does it take us? I don't know, but we'll see. But Nakoshi kind of lays in a fetal position. Even at the beginning, I think they show a fetus, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, he lays in a fetal position, and then there's obviously the talk about how babies have the best sense. Obviously when they're, and then there's the talk about how babies just have the best sense, just because they don't have past experiences to rely on to kind of put what they're thinking or sensing into a frame. So there's just a lot of talk about infancy in that nature. So I want to see kind of where that takes us. As of right now, it really hasn't taken us anywhere outside of the fact that, like a kid, they see stuff, and it makes sense. And I'm more so thinking of a toddler, but toddlers, there's all the time that they think they see stuff, they think they hear stuff, all these things, and we're like adults, and we're like, oh, that doesn't make sense, or I don't believe it, or whatever. And while I don't think it's to this extent, Nakoshi is seeing stuff that no one else will see. And they're picking up on small details that no one else will notice. One thing I'll mention is the lady with the neck. He said it looked like she's hiding her neck, but in reality, I think she had a lot of. She either had a lot of she had a lot of jewelry on her neck, or didn't have a lot of jewelry on her neck. Either way, it was apparently she used to get strangled, and so that's something that maybe with a person who's just got a lot going on, they're not going to pay attention to that, but a kid might, and be like, oh, and point it out, but not in the in-depth way that Nakoshi's able to do so. And that's one thing Ito points out to him, is that you're able to see that, but you're able to conform that into a thought because of the fact that you have your past experiences. But I don't know. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to think about. I could really go longer, but I don't want the video to be too long, especially because I feel like I'm just rambling. But overall, like I said, I'm enjoying the story. I don't feel like this is an info dump. I do feel like I said, the pacing's good enough to where I'm just kind of going along with the flow, but I'm enjoying everything I'm reading so far. Nothing feels out of whack. Nothing. Haven't ran into anything crazy as of right now. I think it's a solid read. If you're looking to something to wow you, I don't think this is it, but it does feel like a slow burn movie, and I like those movies, especially when the payout is worth it. So hopefully the payout is worth it. We're about to go ahead and read book 2, and this is probably the first time we're getting like another character, because the 1775 girl, she is the cover of book 2, so I don't know if that means there's gonna be more of her, less of her. I don't know. We'll see. But right now it's just been mainly Ito and Nakoshi, so we'll see where we go from here. So it's been a few weeks, only because after I read the first omnibus, I ended up reading 2 and 3 like consecutively. I know I was supposed to do a video after every one, but I was just in the middle of the night, and I just kept reading. So it's been a while since I recorded the first one, so I don't remember everything I said, so I may sound ridiculous, but really, and I kind of reflected on how I want to do this video. I'm not going to go, point by point and talk about just exactly everything that happened. I'm just going to kind of give the top points and just give my analysis or my thoughts on it. So at this point, Ito's trying to break down the girl. I don't believe we ever get her name. I feel like there's maybe a quick part where we get her name, but I don't quite remember it. But I do know they're for her 1775. I'll just keep saying the girl. But anyway, Ito was kind of trying to break her down in order to be able to sleep with her. And then at this point, that's when the girl, and Ito, he picked like very normal things for a teenager to do, specifically a teenage girl in this scenario, and the girl was able to kind of attach herself to that. Now a lot of that could be because a big key part in this is that she doesn't really know who she is, and then we kind of, later on, even in this volume, we kind of find out there's reasons to that, but at this moment in time, she really doesn't even know who she really is. So attaching those things is more like, oh, that is normal, I do that, and then just kind of trying to find herself in the words that Ito was saying, even though they're very generic. But he tries to break her down in order for her to finally break and say, okay, I want to sleep with you. And he gets her to that point, but at that point it feels as though the tables turned, because now she is the one that's being forward and he kind of is drawn back. And I don't know if that's because really he didn't think he would get that far. I don't know if maybe that's like him getting that far changed some things as far as him being just like maybe even though he didn't think he would get that far, the thought of having sex could throw him. I don't know what it was, but basically it just threw him off. And at this point, that's when the girl really started to take over, and her homunculi was really taking over his. And at this point in time, she's the sand girl, and she starts to absorb his body, because at this point Nakoshi tells Ito, well, he actually tells Ito that Ito's normal, but we see from Nakoshi's point of view that Ito's actually like water or some type of liquid. And of course we know that sand, you wet sand, the water just kind of absorbs in it, and that's kind of what Hideo Yamamoto was kind of portraying here, is that she was kind of taking over Ito, and there was some points where it felt as though it never showed Ito's homunculi taking over her, but it did show kind of her breaking down. In this case, once the tables are turned and she was kind of the one being forward, you saw her kind of take over, and he couldn't take that. Now, could that be because there's a lot of reasons for that. Like I said, could he not be, expecting he would get that far? Could he just not like being controlled in that way? Because in so far, everything we've known about Ito, he's in control, and he's somewhat of a manipulative person. We saw that with Koshi. We saw that with the girl, and in the manipulative different ways. As we see with the girl, it's more lust. With Nakoshi, it was just more like a mind games that he was playing with him. And even though Nakoshi was a willing participant, it still felt as though Ito was in control. At this very moment, he loses he is losing control. And then that's when he starts to freak out, especially when she says that she's not going to kiss him until he puts on this lipstick. And once he puts on the lipstick, he kind of like breaks out. I don't know if that's like an allergic reaction or what at this point. I know now, but at this point, I didn't know if that was like an allergic reaction or what. But he immediately darted out the room. And that is kind of the last we hear of him. And so at that point, with this story, I didn't really like it just because you do go so long without hearing from Ito again, and there's not really an explanation as to why that happened. But I think that to me the biggest takeaway here was that in a way they're kind of the same person, and I want to say this was kind of mentioned in the previous volumes, but while sand can take up, and because that's at the point they were saying she was the sand girl. While sand can take up the size of any container you put it in, so can liquid, and that's what Ito was. That's what the kind of Koshi saw Ito was, liquid. But I would say, you know, sand is like physically is more. I wouldn't say harder. Is that a correct word? But either way, it's just as though water just seems a little more fluid. And this is me overanalyzing, so I could be wrong. We'll find out. Now I don't really know the difference between Ito being water and the girl being sand, but they do both kind of fit the same mold. It's just in different ways. There's got to be something for that, and I quite don't know what that is, but there has to be something that can explain why someone like, now granted, maybe not everybody can have the same homunculi, but why Ito is someone that's water and the girl's more sand, but like I said, the outcome is the same. So I really would like to know that. If you know that, let me know down in the comment section below, but I really would like to know. But anyway, as she puts the lipstick on him, his water container starts to burst. And so to me, that symbolizes a way of like either the mold he's trying to be in that doesn't fit, or that's his true self coming through. I don't know, but that's really what I took away from that scene, because at that point of reading, I was leaning towards the mold he's trying to fit just doesn't agree with that at all, even though we see his outside appearance, and it's not as though he's a rebellious kid in his own right. So he has the ear piercings and whatnot, which is what you would not think of as a stereotypical doctor or a med student. So maybe there's something there, but yeah, that's just kind of what I took away from it. But like I said, Ito darts out, Nakoshi comes in and kind of saves the girl. Now this is where it kind of gets weird, because one, you don't really hear from Ito for like a while, maybe until like the end of the omnibus, and then how the girl was just so willing to kind of ride with Nakoshi, and she goes on and he takes her home. I mean, you do have to progress the story in some way, but I do feel like I wish there was like a better way. She did recognize him as like, oh, you're the guy from the store, but even then, like at that point, you think he's a criminal. So I don't know. But either way, we move on to the story, and this is where Nakoshi takes the girl home, and we're able to see kind of why she is the way she is. And at this point, Nakoshi realized that she's not saying necessarily, she's just symbols, and all these symbols are just portraying her. I don't really know, like just being made up of a bunch of different things. So just being made up of words, being made up of all these things, because she doesn't have a true self. So all these things that's been said to her, all these things that she's trying to adjust to, all these things that she thinks, they're all just trying to fit their way into her lifestyle in a way. And it did seem like these symbols, at least from me reading, it did seem like symbols may have been like something lost in translation. I'm not quite sure, but we come to find out that it's like just affirmations of her and just words that's being said to her and things like that. That's kind of what makes her up. She doesn't have her own true identity. It's just kind of whatever has been thrown at her, and maybe some things of how she feels. That's what makes her up. I don't know if it's being said symbols because of Japanese characters, and then they look more like symbols than letters. I don't know. I don't know if that's like a translation thing, but that's what it seemed like to me. But either way, the key point is that this is what built her up, and this is why they thought it was sand. But in reality, it's just a bunch of words that, like I said, have been either thrown her way or what she's thinking, but it's not quite her. This is just kind of, it takes the form and whatever kind of mood she's in, or whatever scenario she's currently in. And at this point, like I said, once we get there and Nikoshi drops her off with her mom was just kind of like, what were you doing? This, that, and the other. She was like, I was studying. And then her mom just, one thing that I really like that Hideo Yamamoto did is that if she's sand, even though at this point simple, but we'll just keep saying sand. If she's sand, her mom kind of had like insect. I was thinking more of like an ant and how they build like ant piles and whatnot. And while that's necessarily dirt, still, that was kind of what she was doing. She was building her up because she was broken down, especially when she took the teddy bear. The girl broke down, but and that's what the girl was kind of holding on to, was like, this is my comfort zone. But her mom thought, like, that's ridiculous, you shouldn't be playing with that. And then as she broke her down, she built her back up in the way she sees fit, that the mother sees fit. And that kind of plays into how the sand is just going to keep changing in no matter, you know, depending on the situation that the girl's in. So you kind of see that she comes from somewhat a controlling household. But then we go on and then we split off into this weird scene that I don't really think I still understand. Basically the girl, she commits self-harm. I don't know the word to say without getting banned on YouTube, but she commits self-harm and she starts to lick it. I don't really know what that, like, I'm not too familiar with how that plays out in literature in any way, so maybe that's something normal, but she licks it and that part I don't really get. And the juxtaposition of Nikoshi pleasuring himself and then licking it, I was like, where is this going? And I can tell you right now, before we even get into the further part of the manga, to me, it still hasn't, no pun intended, but it still hasn't came back around to the point where I'm like, oh, that makes sense, or oh, I see it. It's shown back up in ways, but not in the way where it really makes any sense. So at this point, like I said, we see what kind of background the girl's from. We see how she's broken down rather, by her family and being controlled by her mother. And also we see that at this point she's missing her phone and she left her phone with Nikoshi. He goes to take it back. So this next part I'm not really going to go too into detail because it contains like essay, I think is the correct term for it. If you don't know what essay is in literature, look it up. But I am going to gloss over what I think it means and then just kind of give my opinions on kind of what Yamamoto was trying to do there. So like I said, essay occurs and Nikoshi feels as though the girl is taunting him and he doesn't like that she's made up of symbols, or like we're saying sand, in that house. She's like, she's not a real person. And then there's a part where I will say this, like he kissed her and then she started to take over his body, and I think that's him kind of seeing himself, because we come to find out that Nikoshi himself necessarily wasn't made of symbols, but he was made of like his status and items and things like that, and just like certain lifestyle that kind of made him who he was, even though that's not really who he is. And he was kind of used that like kind of as a front, and that's kind of what he's accusing the girl of doing. So as far as, and that's kind of really just all I'm going to touch on that, just because I obviously don't want to go into detail about that, but as far as like not trying to analyze it and trying to just take it for what it was, it didn't feel like it was necessary. It felt as though that could have been presented in definitely a different way, a more effective way. That part, I think it was just I personally just think it was bad writing. And there's bad writing in this manga, kind of, I wouldn't say everywhere, but there's times where it's like, okay, like and I'll talk about this maybe at the end of when I'm done doing all of it, but it's like, okay, let's move this along. We're kind of just playing around here. And while that necessarily wasn't playing around, but it definitely felt as though this story could have been told a different way. Why you choose to go this way, it didn't really do anything. You know what I mean? And not that necessarily it's supposed to do anything, but like, and this is maybe a terrible example, but like you watch Law and Order, and of course that's like a big part of Law and Order SVU, but there's reasons for it. Like it helps people come forward with stuff like that and all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of stuff you see with that's broken down into, one, it's kind of based off just, it's trying to show people like this really happens, and then two, it kind of gives people an idea of what to do if that happens and whatnot. Here, not necessarily, it doesn't have to go that route because that's a whole different reason, but there was nothing here to call for that. Like it literally could have been told a different way, as opposed to like Law and Order. Those stories necessarily can't be told in other ways. You know what I mean? Maybe that's a bad example, but that's just kind of how I saw it. Is that there's just really no reason for that story to be told that way, because the whole key point of it was, in my opinion, was that he was just getting mad at her because he saw himself, and while they do it in different ways, he saw himself. And we saw that with the Yakuza boss, where, you know, he saw himself. You know, he had that accident with the same way the Yakuza boss did. So, and he was just getting upset at her because it felt like he was taunting him, but really it was just, you're being, you know, you're seeing yourself. So I feel like that could have been told a different way. Anyway, after that we move on to kind of Nakoshi driving away. And what I don't really like about that scene that we just talked about is just that it just felt very matter of fact. You really don't even like touch on how Nakoshi basically is a shitball. Before, you don't really know. Like, for me, I didn't really know enough about Nakoshi to really know if, do I like him, do I don't like him. I kind of just felt, you know, pretty even keel about him. But this is like, okay, now I really don't care for him. And then on top of that, like I said, when you look into his past life as they're showing that, you realize that this dude was like a douchebag. And I don't know, it's just, and we could talk about that once again when I finish the manga, but it's just like, well, I'm not really feeling anything here. I like some of the, I really enjoy the themes. I really enjoy just like what the manga's really trying to say. It's just, I felt as though it could be said in better ways. But anyway, as we could tell the story, like he's a player, he's materialistic and this, that, and the other. He thinks he can just buy women, like he'll do something that he's not supposed to do, which I'll let you read the manga to find that out. And then to cover it up, he just buys them something and they accept it. And then he kind of realizes he can manipulate people in that way, which is ironic because we saw that he's getting manipulated by Ito. But that ends volume 3 and 4. Like the essay part took a huge chunk of the manga of that volume. So that, I'm sorry that it seems like I skipped a lot, but to go into detail, but like that literally is a big part of it. Then we move on to 5 and 6, and here I think is relatively interesting. I do feel like it's a little long and a little like drawn out, but I do find it very interesting. So we start off with Nakoshi doing a flashback of being the cab. He's in a cab, and come to find out, the guy who's driving the cab is a guy who also lives in the park with him. And so I guess he's seeing the stuff and then having a flashback to when, oh, I was actually with this guy. Like I know this guy. And basically the guy was part of like one of the big 5 financial firms and then got fired. And then that kind of goes into what we saw at the end of the previous volume, where Nakoshi talking to this girl about like how he doesn't care about people, you know, that their job, he necessarily in a way takes their job from them. He's like, they can be in the park for all I care. And then come to find out, that's probably what happened, is that Nakoshi in some way played a part in this guy losing his job, and now the guy is ending up in the park, same park that Nakoshi's in. Now Nakoshi's living in his tent. So that was just kind of interesting to see how they were able to connect that, and Nakoshi kind of being a little more retrospective as we're seeing more. I don't feel like he could have been that way in previous volumes, just because we didn't have that background. So now we have that background. It's interesting to see kind of him being like, okay, maybe that wasn't the best way of living. And now that I have nothing, I'm kind of seeing that more and more. But now I'm seeing this homunculi, so you know, there goes that. But it is cool to kind of just see, not cool necessarily, but it's just interesting to see like how he's able to kind of look back on that. Next, he caught. Either Ito calls him or he calls Ito, and then he's talking about all the homunculi he see and whatnot, and then he's trying to say, he's trying to tell Ito like, I don't want to see these anymore, blah blah blah. And then they have Ito tries to perform a surgery to kind of put the hole back, because Ito was saying like, oh, I didn't actually drill a hole, but there's actually a hole in his head. I don't know that part. I don't know if Ito, because Ito was trying to play it off as like, I'm done with the experiment. I think he's freaked out based on what happened with the girl, but he's like, I'm done with the experiment. It was kind of in a way all a joke, and there was actually no hole in your head. And then there's obviously a hole in his head, and I thought even then there was a hole in his head when they showed it, but I don't know, maybe we're seeing it from Nakoshi's point of view, so maybe that's why they presented it that way. But either way, that part was just kind of weird. Once again, weird writing. But what is interesting is this point we're starting to break down Ito. So one thing that Nakoshi asked Ito to do is sew up his eye, so his eyes are always closed, so we can always, like, you know, see the homunculi. And here we start to get like more breakdown of who Ito is, and it starts to realize that this water container looks like his father. And that's something I kind of thought was that, you know, he's taking the shape of something. Is it, who is it, what is it? You could kind of tell that it seemed like an older man, but yet it kind of like Ito. And obviously it ends up being his father. And, you know, it makes sense because the way the girl was trying to be who she thought she needed to be based on what her mom says and based on what society says, Ito was kind of doing the same and trying to be, you know, who his father is, but he's trying to, in a way, break out of that. That's why he would burst open, is because that's not quite obviously who his father wants him to be. And we really find that out when Ito gets this guppy fish. And Nikoshi starts to really stare at this guppy because the guppy, and we couldn't find out, but this is what I was thinking then. It represents Ito, because if his father was the container and this guppy was floating around, I just automatically assumed that this is Ito, and come to find out that's true. At this point, Nikoshi, Ito are sitting down, and Nikoshi starts talking to Ito. Ito starts basically insulting Nikoshi back, talking about how you're not who you really are. You say all these things. You got this surgery, this, that, and the other. Which this will be news to us, that Nikoshi got some surgery to change who he is. And while we still necessarily at this point have not seen that surgery or necessarily seen the old Nikoshi in that way, that changed apparently his whole face, I still think that while Ito is saying that, it's still reflective of Ito. He's saying it to Nikoshi as in, you did this, but I think that can mean, you know, that's Ito saying that. And that's what Nikoshi is saying, is like, you're saying all these things, I don't even remember what I look like. It's almost as like Ito's gaslighting him, but Nikoshi's like, you keep saying these things, but that's you. You are the one who did that. You are the one. And, you know, Ito keeps deflecting. And there's one part where Nikoshi takes blood and wipes it on Ito's lips, and this like kind of resembles like the lipstick that the girl put back on. And then the homunculi of Ito starts to burst open, and one part where it bursts open particularly is his private area, which to me that seems like a sign of like sexuality or something like that. And Ito isn't who we are led to believe he is, or Ito wants to be someone. I don't really know, and at this point I'm kind of confused. But this is where I'm talking about like where the themes really start to take place, is because, you know, people go through change, they forget who they are, but it's just the way in the way that story is told of, you know, Nikoshi forgetting who he is, and even Ito maybe trying to change who he is, and those two stories kind of coincide, because at the end of the day, Nikoshi does see, even though if someone else is doing something, Nikoshi does see, you know, reflections of himself. So while Ito may be saying like, you're the one that got these surgeries and stuff, it may not be to that extent, but it could be to the extent of you still have changed who you are. And that's when he starts talking in this country accent. And I think Yamamoto did a really, really great job of depicting this, because in this scene, they're both kind of like dark figures, and depending on how it's being shown and what is being said, you really can't tell who's who. And I think that's brilliant when you think about how, like I said, Ito's just going to be a reflection of Nikoshi in some way, shape, or form. So the fact that Ito has taken the shape of Nikoshi, even though he's talking about Nikoshi, it's like Nikoshi's talking to himself. And like I said, I think that was brilliant. And that was carried out. Like anytime that point needed to be made, boom, you can't see either character. It's just dark figures, but they're talking, and you really can't tell who's who unless they specifically say something that's like, okay, that's Ito, and that's. But either way, I think it was a really, really good job, and I really enjoy that. And that's where it makes the last volume a little annoying, because it's like, obviously that to me was probably one of the better parts. If not, yeah, that's probably the best part of the manga so far. Is just that conversation between Ito, or maybe Nikoshi himself, talking to Nikoshi. I think it was really brilliant, because one, the way it was depicted, two, what was being said, three, just like I said, the theme of just losing yourself and seeing, you know, your lost parts of yourself and everybody else. I think that it really brought the whole manga together. I don't know what's in store for the future, and as FedEx has pulled up to my house, I don't know what's in store for the future, but that part particularly was great, and I really, really enjoyed that. And then in the latter part of this volume, Nikoshi calls Ito and tells him to basically have dinner but he wants Ito to dress up as a woman. Now, this part I don't really. It's like, once again, I understand what is trying to be done. I just don't. And maybe because I like I said, I stopped reading volume 7 and 8 because I was like, I gotta get, record this part before I started to mix everything up, and then that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, this part was just puzzling to me because I just don't really get what's trying to be told here. I know we're supposed to have this part that maybe having issues with his gender, sexuality, or something. I'm not quite sure, and I'm not even quite sure the best way to discuss that. Like, I'm not sure like what exactly is the problem here as far as what Ito's going through, because like I said, I'm not finished yet. But what happens is Ito dresses up like a girl. Now, one, I will say he didn't really fight it that much. He just kept saying like, Nikoshi, you're weird, Nikoshi, you're crazy, but he didn't really. I feel like that's a very easy situation to be like, no, I'm not doing it, and then case closed. But come to find out, once they go to dinner and Nikoshi starts and they start drinking, Ito starts to take more feminine like approach to life. Like, he sees a woman across like the room and starts to try to sit like her and position himself like her and act like her. And then like some of the words, his dialogue becomes a little more feminine. And I don't really know what is the point of this. Now, what is the point of this in the story is that apparently Nikoshi is trying to find himself by taking Ito, who I guess we're supposed to believe that wants to be a woman, and he's taking him to where Nikoshi used to take other women out to dinner, and that's where he's trying to like backtrack. And since I guess he didn't have a real woman to talk to, I don't know. I really don't know like what we're trying to get at here. I guess the storytelling here is cool as far as just like the story itself, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm vibing with the way it's being executed, because I don't quite know yet. Maybe in the next volume it's explained and I'm like, oh, that makes way more sense. But right now, I wouldn't say that the storytelling seems lazy, but it does feel like as though it just feels like we're rambling here. It feels like we're getting nowhere fast. I will say there was an interesting part where as this is going on, and Ito's telling Nikoshi about himself, just like, oh, you're just doing this because of this, that, and the other. Nikoshi looks into the window and doesn't see a face. So I think that represents like Nikoshi thinking that, okay, I'll be able to find myself, like, kind of retrace my steps, but I don't even remember that time, like, to even know who I was then, who was I back then, what I looked like back then, or anything. So that part was interesting, and there's interesting tidbits like that in here. But as far as like the whole premise, I'm just not feeling it. Now, I will say at the end of this particular volume, Nikoshi smells like Ito's feet. Like, he smells the aroma. He doesn't actually go down there and sniff his feet, and he says it's because Ito at this point is alive. Like, he is fully himself. And I will say that there was a part where as Ito is putting on these women's clothes, the figure that of this water figure that was supposedly his dad starts to actually take shape and be in place. And so now when Nikoshi looks at Ito is actually a real person instead of this water figure, or invisible as he was as he was seen at some points. But he kept telling Ito, you just look like a person. You don't have any issues or anything like that. But now, that actually is true. Once he sees Ito dressed up as a woman, there are no, like, Ito's not dressed, not this water or liquid or, whatever, trying to take shape or whatever the situation calls for. So that part is interesting as well, because I think that leads to what we're saying is that Ito wants to be a woman, or I'm not quite sure exactly what's being told, but it's something along those lines. But anyway, after that, Nikoshi is saying that he doesn't exude any smells because exude, I don't know if this is the right word. Exert. That's the word I was looking for. He doesn't exert any smells because he's dead. Like, part of his body is dead. So then he starts talking in this country accent that Ito was using, or Nikoshi was using at that part where I was telling you, like, where's the shadows and the dialect changes. That's what happens here at the very end. So I don't know if that's a hint of Nikoshi kind of awakening as far as who his old self is or what, but that's just kind of what happens, and that's where we're at. I know that there's a lot to talk about in here, but overall I enjoy it. but it's like middle of the pack for me right now. Maybe that'll change as I go ahead and try to knock it out. At this rate, I might just read the next 2 volumes and then, you know, we can talk about it and kind of end it there, instead of trying to, you know, record after each omnibus. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. It's in the middle of the pack. There's some really high points, there's some really low points, and then like the stuff that does not fit into any of those categories is just meh. It's not like above average, it's not below average, it's just meh. And that's just kind of where I'm at. Let me know what your thoughts are. Well, actually, this will all be one video, so either way, let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and try to wrap this up this week. So I'm going to read 7 and 8 now that I got this recorded, and then I'll probably read 9 and 10, and then we'll close it out. Alright, so I went ahead and actually finished the series, but we're going to talk about volume 7 and 8, and then we'll go into 9 and 10, and then we'll be done. So, in volume 7 and 8, at the beginning, at least for 7, we see that Nakoshi and Ito are at this restaurant, and Ito is dressed as a woman, as we discussed last time. And this particular scene is interesting because as Ito is trying to fight, even at the beginning, he really wasn't sure. Like it seemed as though he wanted to do this, but maybe like on his own terms. And as Ito was trying to fight this, we saw that he was kind of observing the room and thinking and just copying what other women did. So while at the beginning he was like, this is stupid," but he was still doing it. I think at any point he really could, if he really didn't want to, he could have maybe gotten out of that and not did it. But I think that this also plays into something we'll talk about a little bit later with Nakoshi, and kind of why he's somewhat forcing Ito to do this. But anyway, Ito wanted to do this in a way you can kind of tell just by his actions. But in this moment, he's observing the room and trying to copy what other women do because, once again, if this is kind of the transition he wants to make, he wants to play the part. So by playing the part, obviously he may not exactly know what to do. So watching other women do, I think that was just an interesting moment because we see him kind of conform to what is the norm of a woman. So he just tries to, you know, emulate those things. Then he also goes to the bathroom and says he needs to powder his nose, which is, you know, especially a woman phrase, you know, that's like stereotypical at least. So he goes to the bathroom. And there's this other lady there, and I think there's a brief moment where he's like, I hope, because he didn't know. And I think that was cool too, because that resembles like how he really doesn't know, like, especially at this point. It's something that he, you know, he may have like flirted with for a long time of wanting to be a woman or try or just see, you know, try the more feminine things in life. And I'm using all these terms stereotypically just because that's kind of what the manga is suggesting. I'm not saying that this is for sure this and for sure that. I'm using that stereotypically as possible because that's kind of how the manga portrays it. But yeah, so we see him trying to, you know, battle those things of whether or not he wants to be a guy, whether or not he wants to be a woman. And in that situation, he goes to the bathroom. He doesn't know which bathroom to go in. But then he's like, you know, I could probably get in big trouble if I go into the women's bathroom and I'm obviously a guy. So he goes to the men's bathroom and a guy happens to come out and is like, "Oh, you're a lady and you're pretty, by the way." So I felt like that was kind of like the nudge Ito needed to, you know, eventually just go into the women's bathroom. And then there was this moment where he shared with this other lady in the bathroom whether or not, you know, like, am I going to be discovered or whatnot? And then she kind of just looks at him and kind of and lets him continue doing what he was doing. And then I think that in that moment, he thinks he burps and the guppy comes out. And I think that this symbolizes just how you are free. You're finally yourself, because we, you know, talking about it up until this point, that guppy was inside him. We didn't know like what exactly it meant. And we, you know, we had inklings that, you know, maybe this is, you know, who he's trying to be. So being in that place at that time was the sign, like, this is who you are. So that's why the guppy came out. At least that was my interpretation of it. I think the cool thing about doing videos like this is that, you know, I could be as shallow or as over the top as I want to be when it comes to trying to analyze, because that's the whole point. I think that, you know, if you're trying to play it safe when trying to analyze these things, one, it takes the fun out of it, and two, you may not ever really get the point. So just going out on a limb or just like denying certain things, I think that is really, you know, kind of what any artist will tell you that they like people discussing their work, and whether that's music, art, manga, books, it doesn't matter. But anyway, that's just how I took it. I took that moment as Ito finally just that symbolizing he's just finally free of being who he wants to be. And then right before we go and transition into volume 8, there's a part where when Ito comes back, Nakoshi smells Ito, and he takes that as like Ito's real, which once again, that can symbolize Ito finally being who he wants to be. So therefore he exudes these, certain smells, and it feels more like a person, because I think that one thing is that his homunculi turned from that watery figure to, a full-fledged person, because he's finally accepted who he is, or who he wants to be rather, maybe. But Nakoshi at this point still has not found his true self, at least. So that's why he smells Ito, but he smells his own foot and says, I don't smell anything. Like I'm still not who I want to be. And it seems as though he thought that helping Ito find who he was would help Nakoshi find who he is. And that just quite didn't work. So once again, we see how deranged Nakoshi is becoming, because he's trying to do these things to find himself. And at the end of the day, he's helping someone else, but he's not really quite finding himself. And I thought that was just a really interesting moment, because that's what this whole manga is about. Once, the tray panning happens, is that Nakoshi's trying to figure out what all these homunculi mean. And then once he gets like a better understanding, he's trying to find his true self, because Ito keeps reminding him like everything you see is a reflection of yourself. So as he's helping these people, when's the part where he helps himself? And I think he still has not done that yet, and it's becoming frustrating at this point for him. Right here, starting off volume 8, this is where things really, really get going. So immediately we see Ito visiting his father. His father is sick, and I mean, at this point, I don't really know. And if you're watching this video, that means you've more than likely already read the manga. So spoiler, I don't know. But I'm not sure like when this happened, so I may get the order wrong. But we already know that Ito already told Nakoshi that his father is just fine. He's just in the hospital. But then we find out that he's actually dying. And in this moment, Ito brings his dad a guppy as a gift. And then he finds like this picture, and then sees that like, oh, who's this girl? And then his dad's like, that's you. And Ito, even at that young age, wanted to be a girl. Now, it doesn't, if I remember correctly, it doesn't really give like a reasoning, or it doesn't give like something that may have happened to push Ito to this. And I'm really trying to remember, but I don't quite. So that we really can't go into that. But what we can go into is that it seems as though this is who Ito always wanted to be. And I think that a very important part of all of this is that Ito comes to find out that like a subconscious reason he's attracted to this guppy is because, well, actually, I guess you could say what maybe pushed Ito to feeling this way is that the guppy he had as a kid, he saw it as beautiful, as pretty, and he wanted to be that way. Am I in a position to say that's enough or not enough to make someone feel that way and want to? I'm not. So I don't really know. But that's just kind of what it seems like it was portrayed in the manga, is that Ito wanted to be seen that way. But obviously he's a boy, and his dad did not want him to be seen that way. So what ended up happening is, at first he was going to like flush the guppy, but then like he didn't. He put it back because he realized how special that guppy was to Ito. And then a cat came in and knocked over the goldfish bowl, and then it broke. So it is as if like everything Ito dreamed about or wanted to do was destroyed in that moment, because that's who he wanted to become. That's what, like, almost like what he admired. He didn't really admire, at least from what it seemed, he didn't really admire his dad. He admired this guppy and just how beautiful it was, and how pretty and how easy it was to look at. And he wanted to become that. And this is reflective also of how his dad, while he didn't necessarily directly destroy the guppy, I think that once again, he's not directly stopping Ito from becoming what Ito wants to become, but more so like indirectly by just pushing him to, follow his footsteps and be in his mode and be how he sees his son, instead of, instead of, trying to eventually want to become a woman. I think that's kind of like that symbolism, because he didn't directly just be like, no, you can't do it. It was just kind of subtle things. And I think, that being subtle was the final straw. Like eventually he was getting ready to flush the guppy down his toilet, do something with it. And while he put it back, because like, that's my son, I love him, I'll support him, whatever he does, he still didn't want that to happen. I think that's kind of just like the metaphor of the cat coming in and eventually breaking it. It's like, I didn't break it, but at the same time, you know, I'm part of the reason it broke, and I'm part of the reason that you may never be able to become who you feel like you should become. So yeah, this is where we just get deeper into the manga, and it's just like, we're seeing a lot of things that we can analyze, and there's all throughout the manga, there's a lot of things you could analyze. And now I kind of know the end. It makes me want to go back and read some of the beginning volumes or chapters. There's not really chapters in the big editions, but still, go back and read some of the earlier volumes, just because of the fact that, and we'll talk about a little bit about this later, but Nakoshi, seeing it from Nakoshi's eyes, he's such an unreliable narrator that you don't, in the moment, there's some stuff you're like, okay, there's no way that's not true. And then it's like, oh, is it? And it becomes confusing. So when you're reading this at the beginning, there's a lot of things that like you write off as, I just can't trust Nakoshi right now. And it ends up being true or close to true, or yeah. So there's a lot of things that in here that I'm really getting to analyze, because we have a lot of the backstory so that we can kind of fully confidently dive in and just dissect. So, but that's cool to me, because I mean, that's the whole point of doing this video. Before we wrap up that little part, I did forget to mention that Ito ends up eating the guppy, and that was something that, like, as he comes in and sees the guppy on the floor, I couldn't tell if it was real or not. And maybe that's me. Like I said, maybe it's just the book just being unreliable at times, just because it is, you know, just showing the craziness and just the worst sides of people at points. But for the sake of the story and for what I read and what I saw, Ito eats the guppy, and I think that's how it just kind of ties back into him, you know, the guppy always being a reflection of him, being inside of him, and being truly who he wants to be, but in kind of keeping that alive in a way. That's just kind of how I took it. And in this moment, some of the paneling in here by Hideo Yamamoto was incredible. Like, it was almost shots of a movie. Like, there was a couple pages you would go without a single word being on there, maybe some like sound effects, but like not too much dialogue. But the shots and the panels, it literally looked like a movie shot, and kind of how a movie would be shot in this particular scene. It was just some really good stuff that I really enjoyed, and it was just a pleasure to be able to like experience that, because like I said, like some of the framing in it was like framing you would see in a movie. So I thought that was really dope. And so at this point, now we're on to like just more about how, you know, back to Nakoshi, and he's just talking about a lot of things with Ito, just saying like how he's kind of explained to him what he's feeling. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier about how he wants to be seen. And he feels as though he's seeing all these things with his, like seeing these different homunculi and seeing people for who they really are, but doesn't feel as though anyone's looking at him for who he is. And even we can talk about with Ito, I mean, that whole experience of, you know, how Ito and Nakoshi met till now, it's not as if Ito really cared about Nakoshi, the person, too much. Not that maybe he should have or shouldn't, but still, like, that's just a fact that he just really hasn't been seeing Nakoshi for who Nakoshi is, and more as a science experiment. And Nakoshi just goes on to tell, you know, how one time, you know, there was this woman that did see him for who he was, but he, not that he doesn't remember her, but he doesn't kind of know what happened between them, and he doesn't, you know, he misses that. He misses that because every woman he's talked to since then has not been able to give him the same satisfaction in that way that that woman was able to give. And after that scene, we go on. I mean, he's in the park and kind of telling the other homeless guys the same thing. It's just like, there are girls out here that are beautiful, that, you know, can see you for who you are, and this, that, and the other, and just how powerful, you know, having someone like that really is. And in this moment, we're seeing like a juxtaposition between Nakoshi and kind of like being the center of attention, and having like the crowd going, and having I guess like a good point in life. I wouldn't say good, but it's more of like I'm trying to find the words here, but it's more like a positive point in life, or somewhere he can look back and say, okay, like it kind of feels like my old life. Whether he, you know, earned that old life or not, I mean, that's to be determined. But in this moment, it's just a good juxtaposition of showing like him kind of having a crowd around him, and people pay attention to him, which is these old guys kind of hanging on every word he's talking about when he's talking about, you know, this woman. And then how, you know, being in the hotel, which is literally across the street, but being in the hotel and having these women hang on every word he says, even though he's lying and stuff. And what's crazy is that the old homeless people think he's lying about this girl. Like, there's no way someone like that exists, but he's saying that she does. And in this situation, like when you when you see the flashbacks of him being in that hotel and taking different women there and buying them different stuff and whatnot, he's lying to them and saying, but they believe him, and he's lying to them, telling like, oh, you're beautiful, and I want to be with you, and this, that, and the other. But in reality, he just wants to have sex with them and just kind of move on. So I thought that was a really good juxtaposition, because it's literally across the street from each other, but it's completely two different tales. Like, it's Nakoshi at the top and Nakoshi at the bottom, and then kind of like the car, which is kind of like a carryover from that old life, is in the middle. I don't know if that's like the case. I could be reaching there, but I did just like that imagery of to me, that's what it was portraying. So just some really good stuff here. And then I'm looking at my notes because I got to remember all this stuff. And so still in volume 7, I believe, now that I think about it, I believe I slipped up and said something about volume 8 earlier, but we're still being in volume 7. Nakoshi can't see homunculi anymore. I don't really know what happened there. As someone who's finished, I still don't quite know or understand what exactly. Maybe the effects wore up. I'm not really sure. I don't really know like the tie. I feel like it has to be a tie in between him accepting that this woman really saw him for who he was, and it has to relate to him not seeing homunculi anymore. I just don't know what that reference is. Maybe one of you can let me know down in the comment section below. But he's unable to see homunculi anymore, and he goes to Ito and kind of ask him to redo the holes. Or not redo, but maybe do more, because he saw that like in some research or whatever. And this is definitely tying into volume 8, because volume 8 I don't really have many notes because it's kind of surrounded by the same thing. But it's like he can't. Ito refuses to make the hole bigger just because it becomes dangerous. So Nakoshi's like, well, why don't we just drill another hole? And the Ito's not really a fan of that. So at some point, something comes up to where it requires Ito to leave, so he doesn't really get the job done. And then when he comes back, Nakoshi's took all the tray painting equipment and ends up trying to do it himself, which he successfully does so. He goes on to a public bathroom in the park and drills another hole in his head. So now he has 2. And even then, at the beginning at least, he's unable to see homunculi. He doesn't really understand why. And I think this is really, like, even without me having read the rest of the manga, of course, this honestly feels like the beginning of the end, just because of the fact that anytime in any story where someone has to do something to get a power or an ability or something, and they try to recreate that high, which is literally like a drug, that's like the beginning of the end. Even if it is a movie or show or whatever about drugs, like once they try to recreate that feeling that they once got, and they're willing to do anything to have it, in this case drill another hole in your head, that's the beginning of your downfall, if you kind of haven't fallen down already, which we all know that Nakoshi by this point has. So yeah, this was just not really interesting, but yeah, this is just crazy because, like I said, he's chasing that high, and at this point he's unable to get it. And as someone who's having a fall from grace, and I really wouldn't say fall from grace, but who's just struggling right now mentally, to have that action that got you your first high not give you another high has to be demoralizing. It has to make you feel as though you really are just about to lose it, which, outside looking in, we already know he's lost it. But inside looking out, for him, most times the people in those situations don't think they've lost it or don't think that anything really wrong with them. And that's kind of how Nakoshi feels in this situation. Here we are at the final omnibus of Homunculus volumes 9 and 10. So at the beginning of volume 9 and kind of towards the end of volume 8, Nakoshi talks about how there's this woman he sees that he recognizes, or he feels like he recognizes, but every time he looks at her, her face changes to another woman that he somewhat recognizes, and this is the only homunculi he can see. So even though he's drilled another hole in his head, he can only see one homunculi only, and it's from this lady. And with this lady, one thing I noticed is that he never really, also another thing, and I could be completely wrong about this, I don't even think you ever hear this lady's name. I don't think you ever hear this mysterious woman's name. And that plays a part into kind of where we're about to go with this story. But one thing is that he stays looking at her body, like he doesn't really see her as a person. He's more obsessed with her body, and not necessarily in this manner. It's not necessarily like in a physical kind of way. It's just more so those are like the features he somewhat remembers. He doesn't really remember her, and he keeps mistaking her for Nanako, which is the woman that he said that was the only woman that could really see him for who he was. He kept thinking that she was her, but we find out that eventually she was not. And I'm going to kind of put 9 and 10 together so I could tell this whole story and kind of, wrap this up. And there's points where he keeps running to this woman and he accuses her of chasing him. He's like, you got to be Nanako. You got to be. She's like, I am not Nanako. No matter what you're trying to portray on me and put on me, I am not this woman that you speak of, even though we may share some similarities as far as they like drawing and whatnot. And then Koshi kept trying to get this woman to draw him or see him because he thought she was Nanako. And this, to me, is like, this is where, okay, we're at the, it's crazy because we're at the peak, but the peak of the downfall. And this is where he's constantly harassing this lady, to me, about how she's, and I say harassing, but like their encounters were a little edgy. But she definitely saw him out. There was times where she would come to him and try to get him to give her a ride and whatnot. So it's not as though he was stalking this lady, but their encounters were pretty edgy. So he tries to get her to see him and draw him. He's becoming furious that this lady is just not able to give him what he's looking for because he believes she's Nanako, even though she may share a lot of the similarities and whatnot. And then, the homunculi playing tricks on Nakoshi because he keeps seeing things like what he wants to see. And that's kind of what Ito has been telling him this entire series, is that you're only seeing what you want to see. You're only seeing things that reflect your life. You're not necessarily this isn't really happening. And Nakoshi just cannot grasp that and is still going at this lady, claiming that she's someone that she's not. So eventually, I think she comes to him for a ride, and they ride around. He takes like a detour, and he takes finally Ito's advice and say, like, this is all reflections of yourself. So he starts talking to the lady as if he sees himself, because there's sometimes she's faceless, sometimes she has, the face of his father, to people, women he slept with, people he knows. There was this guy in school that he felt as though was a hollow guy that, he only looked good, but he didn't contain the substance that Nakoshi had, and no one ever looked at Nakoshi, and they didn't feel like he was viable because he was ugly and whatnot. And that's another thing that like kind of, it almost kind of took me out. I wouldn't say take me out because I still was engaged in the story, but it felt like it was a little much, is that they just kept hounding on the ugly. And I know that at least for me, in this scenario, ugly doesn't necessarily, even though, it was drawn that way, but ugly necessarily didn't mean ugly physically. It just meant, I felt as though it meant like ugly emotionally, ugly spiritually. And that's kind of where Nakoshi falls in line, is that he was so worried about his face being ugly, which his dad one time said he was ugly. He didn't take the time to realize, like, maybe his spirit, his self-awareness, his self, like his inner self, how ugly that was. And like I said, his dad maybe shouldn't have called him ugly as sin, as he said, but still, it's as though you're so worried about your outside, and granted at that age, because a lot of it took place in like middle school, high school, it seemed like that is what applies to a lot of people, is that their outer appearance. But you thought you were improving your inner self, but in reality you were just bitter of your outer self, and your outer self not being quite up to par or whatever, and thus made your inside ugly. That's just kind of how I took it. And if not, then that's fine, but that's just how I saw it. And that's kind of why Nakoshi is like on this spiral. From then you see that from that point forward, he's on this constant spiral. Now, it was an interesting downfall because in a way, his life went up, make more money, get more women, get more gifts, be seen as like a real go-getter at your company. Like, those are all plus depending on who you are. And then you got a makeover, like you got the surgery done. And so while you're going up, your inside is going down, like who you are as a person. The reflection of emotionally, spiritually, like your inner self, that's going down. It's quickly too. So while as quick as this is rising up, as in your status, maybe who you are and getting that real self-fulfillment is quickly going down. And that was the interesting part of all this, is that he tried, the further up he tried to go, as far as like on the outside, his inside was suffering for that. And, eventually you're losing yourself. That's why at times he couldn't remember himself. He couldn't see himself. And that's why when he was talking to this girl and she was going through all these faces that he saw, at the last one was his, and he couldn't realize it because he didn't know who he was anymore. So yeah, it's just crazy how deep this manga got, And sometimes it doesn't even seem as that deep, but you got to understand, like, it's like one of those things where it's not going to sit here and say, this means something, this means something, this means something. You just got to understand the situation and understand the story, and then you can know what to pick and choose as far as what's meaningful and what's just story progression and what's like, yeah, there was just a lot of good stuff here. This by far was my favorite book of the entire manga. So out of the 5, the 5th one was my best. I would have to go back and think about ranking them. If that's something you want to see, then let me know. But this one by far off the top of my head was probably my favorite. Just because this is where I had enough information and I knew enough of what it seemed to be true to be able to make my thoughts and opinions and really analyze what's going on. So yeah, this was just some good stuff here. And so after he's constantly just complaining to this lady, because remind you, he's saying these things out loud about what he really wants to say to himself. This lady is saying like, how dare you tell me, because obviously she doesn't know what the heck is going on. How dare you tell me that you want to be seen so bad, but in reality, you're not even trying to see what you want people to see in you. You're not trying to see in them. Everything you've seen at people is shallow. Like, even though we talked about how earlier Ito, I think, manipulated Nakoshi and used Nakoshi. Sure, I'm not saying he didn't, but at some point, like, the roles reversed. So once Ito was kind of out of his, I don't want to be a part of it anymore, Nakoshi used Ito. He was like, how else you're going to find more about yourself? How else you're going to do this? You need to do these favors for me, or else I can't help you. But in reality, he's only trying to help Ito to help himself, because he thinks it's going to help him, better himself. And that is what this lady kind of was saying to him, is like, how dare you say that all these people did something to you, but in reality, you never, even from the beginning, you never tried to see, what you want other people to see in you. And so however can you expect to get that in return? And I think this happens in the next volume, but like I said, I'm wrapping kind of all this up. That Ito even tells him, like, sometimes, and most of the times, you cannot expect to help someone or look at someone in this case and expect something in return every time. Like, just because you help someone or just because you're looking at somebody a certain way doesn't mean that they should look at you. That's just how life goes. It's not always you do stuff in return. And most of the time, if you are approaching life that way or approaching anything that way, then that just makes you just as bad as the person who's not, paying you any mind. It's because you're doing these things not for, just the goodness of your heart. You're doing it to get something in return. And, and that's a good point to me. I've always felt that way, just like in life in general. You can't expect someone to do. I've always just acted in a certain way just because it felt like it's the right thing to do. It's the thing I should do. And I don't really expect anything in return. It's just, sometimes it makes me feel good. Sometimes it's just, like I said, what's the right thing to do? This feels like the right thing to do. I'm going to do it. But Nakoshi does come back with a good question. Like, then what's the point? What's the point? He says of looking, but what's the point of even helping or doing anything for someone if you don't get anything in return? And Ito can't answer that question because it's true. We don't even know if, like, this right and wrong stuff, where that would get us in the end. But so, like, it just feels like it's almost like an unwritten rule, unwritten law, whatever you want to say. It's just, sometimes it's just, sometimes it's just good to be good to people. Like, it doesn't matter any of the other stuff. It doesn't matter religion, doesn't matter your morals. It's just good to be good to other people. And people feel as though that will make the world a better place. Am I here to say all that? I don't know, but that's just kind of how I live my life by. It's just good to be good to other people. I don't really expect anything in return. So that was just a good conversation to have, because after you just chewed this lady out and saying how she won't see you and all these people she was changing to won't see you, you're still doing all this in return. Like, you only yelled at, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're not trying to help this lady. You're not even trying to see this lady. You only keep going to her and keep talking to her just because you're trying to help yourself and understand who she looks like to you and see if she's not a go for you. It has nothing to do with that lady. And if anything, every time he goes back to Ito and talks to him, he talks about how he doesn't say these words, but like, he says that, basically he keeps calling her a prostitute and how she's not worth anything and how this, that, and yeah. Like, and Ito joins along and says the same thing. So you want this lady to see you, even though you think she's not a co, even she may not be, probably not. You're not even trying to see her. you're only trying to see her for the benefit of yourself. So I thought that was just a good kind of wrap up of this whole entire story here, because it does sum up a lot of what Nikoshi's been trying to do. One little part I really want to throw in here, I don't feel like it has a big impact on the overall story, but it does lead up to kind of a reveal we have later in the manga, which this is maybe like the last 100 pages, but there's one part where the cook that is normally seen in the park, that is normally in his like eggshell or and whatnot, we come to find out that eventually his wife died. It was random, and he kind of went on a spiral there, started drinking, and he ended up cutting someone at work, got fired, went to jail, started drinking, and then abandoned his daughter. Now, I believe his daughter was older at this point in time, but still, he abandoned her nonetheless. And that was kind of it. Like, that's why he didn't want to leave the park, because he did have somewhere to go. He just didn't want to go there. Probably because he couldn't face his daughter in the eye, because he abandoned her. He didn't do something right. And this leads to, we'll talk about this, and I mean in a second, but this leads to, like, I think that just really was the story progression to show kind of something that Nikoshi did on his own time. But the cook eventually, after Nikoshi talks to him, ends up hanging himself because he probably just couldn't go back. He made that bed. He ruined his daughter's life by, since she's not having any parents. So how could he go back? And that's kind of one thing the coach was trying to tell him. Like, go back, you have a home. I don't have a home. I have that car. That's it. But no, he couldn't. He couldn't do that because he's the one that ruined that life. And as the cook has taken his own life, Nikoshi just keeps like muttering on about like, oh, if he had the courage, and all he had was a little more courage, and he could have went home to his daughter. And I can't remember the other guy's name, but it's one of like the main homeless guys. He has a name, and I cannot remember his name, but he tells him like, look, no one here can say anything about courage. We wouldn't be here if we did. And once again, I think that's with Nikoshi. Like, if he had courage in the get-go, we wouldn't be in this situation. If he had courage from the get-go, he would have talked to his parents in the last 14 years. He would have been, more forthright with that woman he said that can see in him, which is Nanako. He would have been, probably better off when he was talking to women. It just, a lot of things would have happened if he had a slightest bit of courage, but that's what he kept saying in that moment. And so at this point, he still believes that woman is Nanako. So he's trying to hurry up and find her, because he's like, if I cannot find her, then I might end up like this guy. So the lady ends up finding him. And they drive to her apartment, and she gets like these two, they look like trash bags, but it's probably just because it's black and white. They're probably just like regular bags, but they get those, and then they drive off. And she's like, just go anywhere. Like, it doesn't matter. So they drive off, and as Nikoshi's kind of talking to her, they swerve a little bit. And as they swerve, the money, which is what was in those bags, flies everywhere, and she's like scrambling to grab it all because she needs that money. And the coach is kind of laughing at her like, look, like, you're just another prostitute trying to get all this money. And she basically tells him to shut up. And she says like, I need this. Everybody's always asking and taking stuff from me because of my body, because of whatever. They're not looking at me. Therefore I deserve this money. It's kind of how she puts it. And once again, Nikoshi was judging her, his inner self being spoiled and whatnot. But that, to me, was that's how they come together. Like, he is the same way. While it's not monetarily, like, while it's not money, he's doing the exact same thing. He's scrambling, trying to put stuff together. He feels like everyone has taken it from him or done something to him, did him wrong. So he's trying to scramble and, like, kind of put it all together to make himself feel whole again after everybody basically throughout his whole life has torn him down. That's literally in that moment what I took from that. And once again, I could be reaching, but that's just how it seemed. And I thought that was a good moment, because this woman, while sometimes she didn't have a face, one of the face she had wasn't Nikoshi's. So it was just like, y'all are the same person. While one, I don't think she was really judging him. I mean, she still saw things about him sleeping in the car and whatnot, but those seem like just observations to me. He would judge her, but it's like, y'all are the same person. You were so fixated on trying to be something else, or trying, I would say trying to be something else, because you're trying to find your old self so you wouldn't be the person you are now. You're so fixated on trying to be somebody else or be something else that you're not really seeing, like, this lady is literally you, just in a different way. So as Nikoshi is, kind of talks to this woman after she done yelled at him, and kind of gets, the conversation becomes a little more monotone and a little less high emotion. it is revealed that Nakoshi ended up abandoning this Nanako woman that he's looking for. So once again, this is his fault. Like, I think, to sum all this up, if I could do a character evaluation, let me know if you want that down in the comment section below. If I could do a character evaluation, this is all Nakoshi's fault. Like, he's a scumbag. He really is a scumbag. And like I said, he abandoned that woman. Now he's looking for her. He also abandoned her child. They had a child together. Their child. She was pregnant. And he abandoned her because he felt as though to really leave his ugly life behind, just because, and I really want to say it was all because his dad just called him ugly. Well, this girl in his class called him ugly. They were kids, like kids. And his dad was like, yeah, he's ugly. And he was like, I don't have a dad anymore. Thought that was a little too much, but whatever. Yeah, to leave his ugly life behind, he had to leave them behind as well. He didn't want to take them with him. So from that point, he went and got the surgery, got to school, so on and so forth. Crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. Then the lady's like, wow, you're trash as a person, but I'm not Nanako. And I want to say, like, right before that, she said she was. And that's why this part is really, like, some people, I went on Reddit just to make sure I wasn't tripping. Some people will say that's Nanako. Some people will say it's not. I'm falling in the camp that it's not. I don't think this is Nanako. And actually, even at the end, I think he makes a reference that it wasn't Nanako. But we'll get to that. And so she says she's not Nanako, and he kind of loses it. And it goes black. So, and literally black, but you just see dialogue. And I don't know, I'm not saying he's hitting her or anything, but it seems she does it like out at her, let me go, stuff like that. So he's probably like grabbing her or something and just frustrated because he's like, you said you would see me. I told you I see you. You said you would see me. And she just runs out the car, darts out the car. As soon as she does that, Yakuza pulls up. So just a brief talk about the Yakuza. This Yakuza guy apparently was just like giving her money just because I guess she was a prostitute or maybe just worked with the Yakuza. I'm not really sure which one. Maybe both. But anyway, they stashed the money at her place. She was trying to take it and run. So he follows her, and then it happens real quick. Like he hits on the lady, and then Nakoshi just breaks him down and talks about like, put that gun down. You put your sister's eye out like that. You need to go see your sister. Then the guy cries and leaves. Anyway, after he breaks down the Yakuza guy, and the guy goes home and runs off. Nakoshi and the woman say, like, the woman's like, this is where she says something about her being Nanako or something like that. And I feel as though she's just said that just because she was like, wow, you really can see souls the way you broke that guy down. Like, I want to be, like, now I believe you. Now I believe that you will see me for who I am. And I want to be the person you want me to be so that we can be, maybe not necessarily be together, but like, I don't know, be together, but maybe not in like strict, like super romantic. I don't know how to explain it because it will be contradictory to what's about to happen next, which is crazy stuff. But anyway, they go live happily ever after, essentially. Nakoshi goes and picks up the tray panning kit and takes it with him. And then he's like, I'm going to help you see what I see because I see you for you, but now I want you to see me for me. And he does that by talking to, he digs up the kit, and then they go to the hotel. And then he drills holes in her head. I think it's just one. He drills a hole in her head. And then afterwards, he's like, you see any homunculus? She's like, I don't. And he's like, well, I remember it took me some time. He's just rambling. He's going crazy. And then they make love. They have sex. And what is really crazy about this part is that, one, is very graphic. Like, you see everything. Two, it's himself. For Nakoshi, the lady eventually literally turns into Nakoshi. And he's like, oh, you know, like, there you are, I see you. And now he basically feels like, finally, like, I've gotten to the point where I'm where I'm supposed to be. And then he has sex with himself. Crazy stuff. Like, I was like, this is a little much. And there's some other stuff in there that's been a little much, but still. He's like, they start having sex with themselves, I guess. Because then Nakoshi eventually turns, because she starts seeing homunculi, but Nakoshi turns into her. Like I said, they're the same person, so that's why they're seeing it this way. And then you see that like where her hole was, it kind of bubbled up, and then boom. And so she falls asleep, and then Nakoshi leaves, saying he's gonna go get something to eat. But then you can see like it pans back, then you can see like her head bleeding and whatnot. So that pretty much seems like her brain popped out or whatever. And that's really it. Nakoshi goes on, and everybody he sees is him. So he's like, am I in heaven or am I in hell? Which I would say hell, because once you see everybody as yourself and you're the shitball person you are, like, that pretty much tells me everything I need to know. So and that's kind of why. It's just he felt like he finally was where he needed to be. So everybody he saw being him represented that like everybody is okay and nobody is like hiding anything or anything like that. That's just how I took it. Then it randomly jumps into a year later and he's just kind of sitting there, bald head, patches all over his head, eye patch. Looks like he went completely blind in that eye, honestly, just from trying to do the homunculi too much. And then Ito shows up, and Ito shows up as a woman, fully dressed as a woman, as if they were on that date that we were talking about in a different, earlier in the video. And basically he's just like, well, that so-called Nanako, I realized she was useless. She died. So it's like saying she's useless is crazy. But he was saying, she was basically useless. And how, she didn't really see me for who I am, but I know you can see me for who I am. You saw me who I am a long time ago. You can see for who I am. And Ito's crying because I'll say she, because at this point Ito's dressed as a woman and I'm pretty sure they want to be a woman. So we'll say she, I don't know. Can we say they? We'll just say, I'm not sure. Like, I don't know. So I'm gonna say they just to be safe. I don't know. We'll say she. They were dressed up as a she. Ito was dressed up as a she, so we'll say she. She was crying because she know that her experiments are what caused all of this. Her not really looking at Ito or looking at Nakoshi as a person is what caused Ito to eventually become this crazy, have this crazy downfall. But it just was evil met evil because they were both. Well, Ito met Nakoshi at the same time he was downfalling, so it was just like. It just worked out. You found someone desperate enough and then the two things collided. So Ito obviously torn up about it, is crying. He's like, I know, I'm sorry, this, that, and the other. And at this point, Nakoshi's like, no, I can help you see me for me. Let me help you. And tries to put the drill to Ito's head. But then eventually the police show up and they look like Nakoshi as well because of his eye. And so he's still seeing homunculi and everybody looks like him. And he's just saying like, oh, good morning, guys. Like, how's it going? Not realizing that one, they're there to come arrest him for the death of that woman. And then two, once again, you're only seeing everybody as yourself because you think you're like, almost like the prophecy is fulfilled. But that's not the case. And that's where it ends. And this manga was a crazy ride. Like, I know this video is long. It's probably like an hour long. Probably more than that. Maybe I'll do a shortened version because I'm realizing the more I ramble here, the more there's spoilers. Maybe I should do a spoiler-free version and then like do this version of like a long conversational like spoiler version. I don't know. We'll see. I'll figure it out. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. If I had to rate this manga, it goes in my top 10. I haven't really looked at. I looked at my top 10 to see if it will be in my top 10, but I haven't really looked to see like where it would rank in the top 10, but just know it will be in my top 10. I really like the themes in here. There were some things that felt like it was a little much. It was a little unnecessary. Some of the dialogue, like I said, like the uggos, the uglies, it was just a lot. It was like, okay, I get the point. It was almost like what I've said about colorists, where like, colorist, the whole plot revolves around color and how important color is, and that's kind of what it felt like because it was like color, and this was like ugly. It's like, I get it, but artwork in here is incredible. Storytelling is incredible. I didn't like that at first. You couldn't really tell what was real or not, but I think that now that I've read it, it makes a lot more sense. And it made sense then, but it was kind of just like, I just really want to know. Like, I'm tired of guessing. But like here, I feel like my guests are a little more educated. So while they still may be guesses at the end of the day, they're a little more educated with a little more background information. But either way, I really enjoyed this manga. I would suggest it. It's a great psychological horror manga. It's not like Junji Ito or that kind of horror. It's like, no, this really makes you think and then really kind of helps, not maybe help you, but you see the dark side of characters. And I think that having a main character this dark and this messed up is good for like just storytelling in general. There's some things that, obviously that I don't think Hideo Yamamoto agrees with that he had Nakoshi do. I'm probably sure of that, but it's just more so there are messed up people in the world. And I feel like that's really what Hideo Yamamoto was going for, is that not really just trying to be like, even though I don't like that some of the actions were played off, if you're a deranged person in that manner, you would play it off. That's just kind of how I took it. I would maybe need to do more research to speak on that clearly, but that's just kind of how I took it. But overall, thought it was a fantastic manga. There's some things that can take you out. So if you want to reach out to me, and ask. I'll be more direct about what those things are. Don't want to get demonetized or anything like that. But anyway, great manga. Thank you for anyone that recommended this to me. And I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it's in my top 10. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.